Today we are doing a serious examination of the source materials, detailing the killing of Brian Thompson. He was the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, and he was killed on December 4th, 2024, in New York City.
It's a story that starts as a horrific crime, but it very quickly became something else entirely.
A flashpoint.
Yeah.
The sources really show how it just ripped open this deep frustration with the entire U.S. healthcare system.
Exactly. And our task here is to really break down the sources in two ways. First, we need to get the facts straight. The timeline of the event, the forensic details, the alleged motive of the accused, Luigi Mangione.
All the concrete details of the crime.
Right. But the second part is maybe more complicated. It's understanding the extraordinary national conversation that exploded right after. We have to look at this through, a few different lenses. There's the criminal side, the corporate side, and then this huge sociological piece.
Before we get into any of that, I think it's absolutely crucial that we pause. We have to acknowledge the gravity of what happened here. Regardless of the controversies around the company he ran, Brian Thompson's life was taken. It was a targeted, violent act, and that's a tragedy. And we have to hold on to that as we look at the very complex and often disturbing reactions that followed.
That's the essential starting point. Because to understand the public reaction, you first have to understand the sheer scale of the company Thompson was in charge of.
And why it generated so much anger.
Precisely. The sources give us a very clear framework for that.
So let's start there with the corporate reality. Brian Thompson was a longtime employee at UnitedHealth Group. He had been there since 2004.
A real company man.
But his role as CEO of the insurance arm, UnitedHealthcare, that was relatively new. It started in April 2021, and it ended on the day he was killed.
And when we talk about UnitedHealthcare, you have to understand this isn't just a big company. It's really the largest health insurer in the United States.
The scale is immense.
It's staggering. They provide coverage for 49 million Americans. Think about that. Their policies, their decisions, they affect nearly 1 in 6 people with insurance in the country.
And under Thompson's leadership, the company wasn't just successful, it was incredibly profitable. The sources show profits just skyrocketing.
Right, from $12 billion in 2021 up to $16 billion in 2023.
And his own compensation reflected that success. $10.2 million a year. These numbers are important because they quantify the amount of money being pulled out of the healthcare system.
That's it, exactly. Those profits are the context for everything that happens next. You have these massive record-breaking numbers being announced, but at the very same time, the company is facing this intense, growing criticism for how it operates.
Specifically for denying claims.
For denying claims and for something called prior authorization.
Let's focus on that term because it's so central to the anger we see in the source materials. For anyone who hasn't had to deal with it, what is prior authorization?
It's a system where your doctor decides you need a treatment, an MRI, a specific drug, a procedure. But before you can get it, the insurance company has to sign off. They have to give permission.
The idea is supposed to be about stopping unnecessary spending.
That's the official line, to prevent fraud or waste. But critics, and the sources really back this up, they argue it's become a tool, a weapon even, to just cut costs by denying care.
And this practice was getting a lot of attention from regulators right before Thompson's death.
A huge amount. The sources point to a U.S. Senate report from just 2 months earlier, October 2024. It showed a big surge in these prior authorization denials, especially for their Medicare Advantage patients.
So we're talking about seniors specifically.
Yes. And when you have the U.S. Senate and, investigative outlets like ProPublica digging into this, it's not just a few unhappy customers anymore. It signals a systemic problem.
The reporting suggested they were using algorithms to do it.
Basically, yes. Using proprietary tools to automatically deny huge batches of claims, prioritizing the bottom line over what doctors are recommending. One of the sources from Fortune was very clear that these investigations were already leaving a significant stain on Thompson's leadership.
And it wasn't just about patient care. The company was also dealing with internal issues. There was a lawsuit in May of 2024 alleging fraud and insider trading against Thompson and other top executives.
Right. The core of that lawsuit was an accusation that the executives, Thompson included, knew about a Department of Justice antitrust investigation but didn't disclose it to shareholders.
And in the meantime,
they allegedly sold off large amounts of their personal stock before the news went public. So it creates this picture, of an institution that was already under intense pressure, both legally and in the court of public opinion.
And tragically, it seems that pressure was becoming personal. The sources confirmed that his family knew he was getting threats.
His widow reported that, yes. He'd been receiving threats, and they were specifically about a lack of insurance coverage.
So the anger was already being directed at him, personally.
It was, which is a crucial detail. It shows that the line between corporate policy and personal danger had already been crossed, at least in the digital world. The killer just brought it into the physical one.
Okay, so let's transition to the timeline of the crime itself. Thompson was in New York for an investors meeting. The morning of December 4th, he leaves his hotel, the Marriott, at 6:40 a.m.
He's walking toward the New York Hilton Midtown, where the meeting was. A short walk.
And the sources confirmed this was not a random act. This was an ambush.
Absolutely. Highly calculated. The assailant was waiting across the street, just stationary, for several minutes. Watching, waiting for the right moment.
Then at 6:44 a.m., the attack happens. The shooter crosses the street, stands about 20 feet away.
A very deliberate distance, not up close, and fires 3 times.
Thompson was hit in the back and his right calf. He was rushed to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead at Mount Sinai West at 7:12 a.m. The autopsy later confirmed it was the gunshot wound to his back that was fatal.
It all happened very, very quickly.
Now, what immediately made this investigation different was the weapon. The forces describe it as a suppressed 9mm pistol, a ghost gun. Can you explain what that means technically?
This is where you see this strange mix of old ideology and very new untraceable technology. The weapon was a partially 3D printed Glock 19 clone.
So not a standard factory-made gun.
Not at all. The key parts that make it a ghost gun are the 3D printed lower receiver and, critically, the 3D printed suppressor or silencer.
And the lower receiver is the piece that usually has the serial number, right?
Exactly. That's the legally controlled part of a firearm. By 3D printing it, the weapon becomes completely unserialized. There's no manufacturer, no record of sale. It's built from plans you can find online.
Which suggests the killer had a certain technical skill set.
A very specific skill set and, an ideological reason to want an untraceable weapon.
There was also a really key detail from the CCTV footage of the shooting itself.
There was. It showed the shooter manually cycling the slide of the gun after each shot.
What does that indicate?
It strongly suggests the gun was malfunctioning, that the semi-automatic action wasn't working properly, which is common with these improvised 3D printed parts. They just don't always hold up.
But he kept firing.
He did. And police noted that despite the malfunction, the shooter appeared proficient, like he knew how to clear the jam and keep going. That suggests practice.
And this brings us to what is maybe the most potent piece of evidence from the scene, the ammunition.
The inscriptions on the bullet casings?
Yes. The police found 3 cartridge cases and some unfired rounds, and they had words written on them.
Delay, deny, and depose. Depose was found on a casing that was fired. Delay was on a round that was ejected when the gun jammed.
The connection to the insurance industry there is impossible to miss.
It's a direct reference. Delay, deny, defend. It's the phrase critics have used for years to describe the tactics insurers allegedly use to avoid paying claims.
But he changed the last word.
He changed defend to depose. The message shifted from just a critique of the policy to the stated goal of the attack, to remove a leader. It was a personalized indictment etched right onto the bullets.
The sources also really stressed the level of planning that went into the suspect's movements. He arrived in New York 10 days early.
November 24th. And he stayed at a hostel, paid in cash, used a fake New Jersey ID. The authorities described him as extremely camera savvy.
Meaning he knew how to avoid surveillance.
Knew where the cameras were, how to move without being clearly identified. He cased the hotel days before the attack, confirming Thompson's schedule. His escape was just as calculated.
He fled on an e-bike heading into Central Park.
Right, and in the park, near the carousel, he dropped a backpack.
And this is where we see another symbolic gesture. The backpack had a jacket in it and Monopoly money.
The Monopoly money is so deliberate. It's this explicit, almost theatrical reference to corporate greed, to wealth, to the idea that this is all a game.
A protest against the financial system.
Absolutely. After dropping the bag, he just continued his escape. Took a taxi uptown to the bus station and got out of the city before a major alert was even fully circulating. The manhunt that followed, with a $60,000 reward, shows how seriously they took this. They were looking for someone with technical skill, ideological motive, and a lot of preparation.
And that manhunt ended just 5 days later. The accused, Luigi Mangione, 26 years old, was arrested.
On December 9th in Altoona, Pennsylvania, he was at a McDonald's, and an employee recognized him from the photos that were everywhere.
His background, as the sources lay it out, was surprising to many. A graduate of the University of Pennsylvania.
An Ivy League education. No criminal record. His family had actually reported him missing just a few weeks earlier. It didn't fit the typical profile.
But the evidence they found when they arrested him was, well, it was overwhelming.
It was a direct match. He had the alleged murder weapon, the same 3D printed gun and suppressor. He had multiple fake IDs. And, most importantly, he had a handwritten document.
And his fingerprints matched prints found at the scene in New York.
Yes. Partial, smudged prints, but a match. The physical evidence was all there.
So let's talk about that handwritten document. The media called it his manifesto. It was short, 262 words, and addressed to the feds.
It's a very pointed piece of communication. He tries to downplay the act itself, calling it fairly trivial, but he emphasizes its systemic importance. He says he worked alone. He gives a kind of half apology for any trauma, but then immediately says it had to be done.
And his main argument, his motive, was aimed squarely at the healthcare industry.
Entirely. He calls the companies parasites that have gotten too powerful and abuse our country for immense profit. He uses statistics to make his point, noting the U.S. has the most expensive healthcare but ranks somewhere around 42nd in life expectancy.
He's framing Thompson's killing as a necessary act.
Almost like a public service in his own mind. He ends the document by saying, "Evidently, I am the first to face it with such brutal honesty."
That phrase is key. He sees the murder as a form of communication. A brutal one, but a necessary one to expose corruption.
Investigators immediately thought this must have come from a personal experience. They looked into his health history.
And they found he suffered from a chronic lower back condition.
Spondylolisthesis. It's a very painful condition where a vertebra slips out of place. He had apparently posted online about his suffering, about an ER visit. The theory was that his own battles to get care for this chronic condition fueled his anger.
But here's the really strange fact in all this.
A critical detail.
UnitedHealthcare confirmed he was never one of their customers. He never had a claim denied by them.
And that changes everything. It shifts the motive from personal revenge to something purely symbolic. The NYPD's chief of detectives concluded that UHC was targeted simply because it was the biggest, the most visible symbol of the system Mangini hated.
So it wasn't about a specific denied claim, it was an ideological act.
A piece of political theater, and the sources draw a direct line from this ideology to other historical figures.
Specifically, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber.
Yes. NYPD analysis pointed to a clear influence from Kaczynski's manifesto, and Mangini's own online activity backed that up. He'd reviewed Kaczynski's work on Goodreads.
It's important to look at the nuance of that review, though. He didn't just blindly praise him.
That's right. He actually called Kaczynski rightfully imprisoned and criticized his violence against innocent people. But in the very same review, he included this quote that he said he'd found somewhere else.
What did it say?
It said, "Violence never solved anything is a statement uttered by cowards and predators," and it went on. When all other forms of communication fail, violence is necessary to survive.
So there it is, the justification.
It's the ideological bridge. He seems to have taken Kaczynski's anti-system anger, but tried to apply it in a way he saw as more focused, more morally justifiable in his view.
And that very ideological component, the idea of sending a message, is what led the authorities to pursue such aggressive charges.
Exactly. They signaled right away that this was not going to be treated as just another murder.
In New York, the initial charges were second-degree murder, weapons possession, but prosecutors quickly elevated it.
They aimed for first-degree murder, which is significant in New York because of how it's defined. You need specific aggravating factors. And the factor they chose was that the murder was committed in furtherance of terrorism.
That's a very loaded term.
Yeah.
How do they argue this fit the legal definition of terrorism?
Well, New York's law is broad. It includes acts meant to intimidate a civilian population or influence government policy through coercion. The prosecution's argument was that because the killing was so symbolic, the bullets, the manifesto, the intent wasn't just to kill one man, it was to intimidate the entire corporate healthcare industry.
So the message from the state was, we see this as a threat to the system itself.
Precisely. They were trying to neutralize the symbolic power of the act by labeling it with the state's most severe charge.
But the sources note that those specific terrorism charges were eventually dismissed.
They were in September 2025. A judge dismissed them, though the second-degree murder charge, of course, remains.
And on top of the state case, the federal government got involved. And that raised the stakes even higher.
To the highest possible level. The feds filed 4 charges focusing on the interstate travel, the stalking, and the use of a silencer in a violent crime.
And the federal charges are what opened the door to the death penalty.
Correct. The state of New York doesn't have the death penalty, but the federal system does. And in April 2025, the U.S. Attorney General, Pam Bondi, directed federal prosecutors to seek it in this case.
That's a massive statement. Federal death penalty cases are very rare.
It signals how seriously the federal government viewed this. They were making a powerful statement against this kind of ideologically motivated violence, trying to stamp out that folk hero narrative that was already starting to form.
And we know Mangini pleaded not guilty to the state charges in December 2024. So he's now facing this two-front legal battle with his life on the line in the federal case.
And while that legal process was unfolding, the American public was having a very different kind of reaction, a truly visceral, polarized response.
It's like the killing just became a conduit for all this pent-up anger.
It absolutely did. And the source materials give us some really astonishing examples of the digital reaction. The most prominent one is UnitedHealth Group's own Facebook post.
Their condolence message for Thompson.
Yes, they had to disable the comments almost immediately, but not before over 100,000 people responded to the post with the haha laughing emoji.
100,000. That's not just a few trolls. That's collective contempt.
It's a complete dismissal of the corporate expression of grief. It showed that for a huge number of people, the story wasn't about a CEO who was a victim. It was about the system he represented.
And the general theme online, as the reporting captured it, was this idea that insurance companies harm and kill Americans by denying coverage. So in a way, they saw this as the system turning on itself.
Right. And this is where we have to look at the historical context. One sociologist quoted in the materials, Zeynep Kefekci, said she couldn't recall another murder in the U.S. being so openly celebrated.
And she made a comparison to the Gilded Age.
Which is chilling. A period of extreme wealth inequality where acts of violence against corporate titans sometimes have this strange underlying public sympathy. It suggests a perception that the system is so unjust that extreme acts become, to some, understandable.
And that sentiment quickly grew into this folk hero narrative around Mangione.
He was romanticized compared to Robin Hood, a vigilante acting against a corrupt system.
And this wasn't just online chatter. It moved into the real world.
We saw look-alike contests being held in New York and Florida. Graffiti with the phrase, "Deny, Defend, Depose" started appearing globally. There was even a billboard in California that just said, "Free Luigi."
That level of public support is what connects this to that old anarchist idea, propaganda of the deed.
It's a perfect modern example. The idea that a dramatic, violent act can force a national conversation and awaken political consciousness. The sources note that the discussion around this killing on social media actually surpassed the discussion around a recent assassination attempt on a presidential candidate. The deed worked. It captured the public's attention.
And the support went beyond just words. It became financial.
A very powerful indicator. Mainstream sites like GoFundMe took down fundraisers for his legal defense, but one on GiveSendGo stayed active.
And it raised a lot of money.
Over $1.3 million by late October 2025. And the donors were very open about why they were giving. They cited frustration with the healthcare system and anger that the government was seeking the death penalty. For many, donating was an act of resistance.
And Mandiant himself acknowledged this support.
He did. His legal team released a message from him in February 2025, thanking people for support that he said transcended political, racial, and even class divisions. He was essentially embracing the narrative that his act had united people against a common enemy.
The corporate world's reaction, meanwhile, was one of pure fear.
It was about survival. This act it shattered the sense of security that executives had. The line between a tough business decision and personal, physical violence was suddenly gone.
So we saw major insurers, not just UHC, but their competitors, Blue Cross, Aetna, immediately start scrubbing their websites.
Removing executive photos, bios, anything that could identify their leadership. One company, Centene, canceled its in-person Investors Day. They moved it online. The risk of another attack was suddenly a real, calculated business concern.
And the security industry saw a massive boom.
A huge surge in calls for executive protection. The sources have these startling details, like 40 UHC executives hiring bodyguards. One senior executive even dyed her hair to avoid being recognized. That's real, palpable fear.
And for UnitedHealth Group itself, this led to massive instability.
Months of turmoil. The stock price dropped significantly from over $600 a share down to almost $300. And this instability led to the CEO, Andrew Whitty, resigning in May 2025.
The company was also fighting a PR war.
A huge one. They hired a defamation law firm to try and counter all the criticism on social media. They were fighting not just in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion.
This forced politicians to respond, not just to the violence, but to the celebration of it.
And their responses were divided. You had the initial universal condemnation.
Right. The White House, President-elect Trump, Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania, they all condemned the killing and the public's reaction to it.
Trump called the celebration a sickness. The Department of Homeland Security labeled the social media rhetoric extraordinarily alarming and put it under the category of domestic violent extremism. The message was clear. This is unacceptable.
But then you had a more nuanced response from some progressive Democrats, a kind of condemnation with context.
Exactly. They condemned the murder, but they used the moment to amplify their critiques of the healthcare industry. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said that for many people, a denied claim feels like an act of violence against them.
Elizabeth Warren said the public reaction should be a warning to the system.
And Bernie Sanders directly linked the public's rage to the industry's profits. So they were careful to denounce the act, but they absolutely validated the anger behind it.
To really get a handle on this, we have to look at the polling data. It moves beyond social media anecdotes and shows us what the country was really thinking.
The polls are critical. And overall, most American adults, about 68% in one poll, found the killing unacceptable. So the institutional norm still holds. But when you break down the data, you see this shocking generational split.
This is the key finding. The Emerson poll found that 41% of young voters, 18 to 29 years old, found the killing acceptable or somewhat acceptable.
41%. It's a staggering number, nearly half of the youngest voting demographic. And another poll of college students found that 45% sympathized more with the suspect, Mangione, than with the victim, Thompson.
Why? Why that specific group?
Well, the analysis suggests this generation is just uniquely burdened. They're facing huge student debt, impossible housing costs, a tough job market. They may see the massive profits of a company like UHC not just as unfair, but as a direct threat to their own future. Their sympathy seems to signal this profound distrust in the system's ability to fix itself.
And there was one last poll from NORC that added a final layer of nuance to the question of blame.
This one is so important. While most people still blame the killer, huge majorities also held the system responsible. 69% said the industry's denial of coverage was responsible for Thompson's death. 67% blamed the profits.
So for most Americans, it wasn't one or the other.
Exactly. They saw it as a tragedy, yes, but a tragedy that grew out of a systemic failure, a failure that let corporate greed grow until it exploded.
So when we look at all the source material, we're really seeing two narratives running at the same time. On one hand, you have very specific crime. It was meticulously planned, ideologically motivated, and used this advanced, untraceable weapon.
That's the criminal act. But on the other side, you have the national reaction, this massive eruption of anger at the U.S. healthcare system. The killing became a symbol, linking one man's violent act to a huge collective feeling of dissatisfaction.
It's a truly modern case where you have these high-tech 3D printed methods meeting one of the oldest forms of political critique-targeted violence.
And we saw how the institutions reacted by trying to protect themselves. More security for executives, PR firms to control the story, and the legal system pursuing the harshest possible punishment to condemn the act itself.
But the public response, which we see in the crowdfunding, and especially in that polling data from young people, it focused almost entirely on the systemic problems the crime dragged into the light.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering question. Given that the public reaction so strongly validated the critique behind the crime, what lasting effect will this event and the documented sympathy for the accused among young Americans have on the political will for real, fundamental change in the American healthcare industry?
Thanks for listening.